Pohrer with Pauly Jail Building Company. I want to welcome all the architects and construction managers and correctional people from across the state and probably from across the country. I want to welcome all the people that are going to be watching us via live stream today. And if you have any questions, you should have the capability to be able to type the questions in. We should be able to print them off and we'll get them asked and answered. All right, so I'm going to talk to you today about we call it the demise of the correctional industry, all right? And Pauly Jail Building Company and other firms across the country, we're what's called a detention equipment contractor. Now, I know there are architects and construction management firms here that understand what a detention equipment contractor is, maybe for some of the local officials from the different counties and the sheriff's department, all right? So a detention equipment contractor like Pauly Jail is a company that buys. As you walk outside today and you'll see all the manufacturer's products, you'll see the steel cells and the door controls and the locks and the furnishings and the doors. We buy all those products that architects design and construction managers put on, and then we put together a complete bid and install it. Now that is pretty much, sounds kind of basic for what a detention equipment contractor is, but in a nutshell, that's pretty much what we do, all right? And on every county jail or state prison across this country, you have involved in your project a detention equipment contractor, those manufacturers, and your security electronics controls companies. Now, it's all to a varying degree, but on every job you're going to work on, you're going to be involved with, they're going to be involved with you. So, what I'm going to talk to you about today is, and I call this the demise of the correctional industry because that's really what it is. Now, my brother and I have been doing this. We're fifth-generation owners. I've been actively involved in this industry since the 1980s, so has my brother. We've seen ups and downs in construction. The last time we saw the downturn in construction, it lasted a lot longer than I've ever seen construction downturns. It lasted probably 5 years. You could debate it, right? And normally what happens in a downturn is the companies that are undercapitalized or who take on too much work go out of business. And that happened to a lot of architectural firms, electrical contractors. Unfortunately, it did not happen in the detention equipment marketplace. So, when you go back to the 1990s, and that's not really that long ago, that's a little bit over 20 years, and you look at how many detention equipment contractors there were across this country, and some of them like Southern Steel and Stewart Decatur and had been around for well over 100 years, all right? And now we're going to flash forward to 2018. And if you look at most of the contractors left, there are only 3 sizable detention contractors left. One is Pauly Jail here in Indiana. One is Cornerstone Detention down in Alabama. And the third is CML out in Colorado. And all the other companies are fairly small and they're really kind of regional. So the reason that becomes important is we're going to talk about a little bit later on. When you see how much work is coming up, not just here in the state of Indiana, but let's just use the state of Indiana as an example. You know, we have between Marion County at $300 million, we have jobs like Hancock County for $50 million, Delaware for $40 million, Vigo for $60 million. There's enough work in the state of Indiana that there aren't enough detention contractors in this country to do. And yet, at the same time, come next summer, when the Marion County Jail is well underway, you're going to have 4,000 beds being built in Detroit, 3,000 beds being built in Columbus, Ohio, 4,000 beds in Draper, Utah on top. So my point about this whole scenario is as we go through this demise, you're going to see, and I know it becomes a little bit concerning, I should be concerned, but you're going to see that we have a lot more work upcoming than we have manufacturers or contractors to do the work. All right, and that's going to get to another point later on. So, well, hold on. Let me say one more thing. I know it gets a little bit scary because all I talk about is the companies that have gone out of business, all right? Well, but there is a good note here on the bottom. We have a couple of companies that have now come back into the business. MTS is a division of Montgomery Technology. They're out of San Antonio. So those were some guys that used to be with another detention contractor that went out. They've now formed another business. You've got 2 of the newest companies down at the bottom, U.S. Detention, they're out of Denver, and you have S3 Detention out of San Antonio. And that's all great, and the architects here and the CMs know that what's good. The problem is you can't just open up a detention contracting business tomorrow and say that you're going to have the capability to have the financing and the bonding and the people. So I can tell you how long it took for my brother and I to build Pauly Jail up. So when people tell me that, well, Joe, these guys companies are going to jump in the industry, and I say that's great, and I know they have experience, but it's going to take time to build a track record, right? And get bonding and everything else. So we can run down here. These are, well, as I say, this is the demise of the correctional industry. So when we gave this presentation in this same conference room in September, I made the comments that I don't think the companies that are going out of business is over yet. And so in 2018, CM Security Windows out of Montreal, who had been around for 56 years, went out of business in a boom economy. Now, they didn't go out of business in the downturn. They went out of business in the boom economy. And another company, Argyle Security, who I think just 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, was the largest detention contracting company in the country by revenue and sales. And now in 2018, they pretty much have closed down their contracting division. Okay? So that tells us where we are today, and we can run down. This is what we've got. We have two of the top security electronics companies in the country are here, Accurate Controls and Stanley Solutions. But you can see these are all the firms that were around the 1990s that did security electronics. Let me fast forward to today. And if you look at it right now, those guys are having to cover the entire country. And Southern Steel and Argyle, I'm pretty sure that TJ and Dusty, are those guys even doing door controls anymore? Either one of them? Okay. So you can see the contraction is still ongoing. And we can run down this is another key issue. All right. So every project that you do in this country, whether it's a 20-cell job or it's Marion County with 33,000 cells, you have to have security hollow metal doors and frames. Now, we happen to have one of the top manufacturers in the country, Titan Door out of North Georgia, is outside. They had their products here. But in the 1990s, these were all the companies, I think there are 23 firms on there that made some kind of security hollow metal doors and frames or bar grate doors. All right? Here we are in 2018. We're now in our third year of a boom market for new construction, and we're basically down to American Steel owns Trust Built, so that basically becomes one company. You have Titan Door in Georgia. Sweeper Metal is out in Oklahoma, but they pretty much make their hollow metal for their own detention contracting division. And then you have Slate Security, which is a smaller firm in Alabama. And I can tell you right now, and I know there are architects and CMs here and our manufacturers, we all know that there's so much work coming in the next 2.5 years. There aren't enough hollow metal doors and frames that can be made from these plants. So everyone then gets a look on their face like, well, what is that getting to? I think I'm going to get to that a little bit later. We're going to talk about why you need to be pre-qualifying your manufacturers and contractors a lot harder than you used to, and why you need to start thinking about, as architects and owners and construction management firms, we call it design assist. Some people call it different things, but at the end of the day, if I'm a county commissioner and the sheriff and I'm looking at I'm going to be building a new jail, instead of thinking about getting hard bids and low dollar numbers, I think might want to start thinking about putting together a team, because it's almost going to be required that you get to that. All right. So we can go through the rest of the manufacturing. Here's the lock companies that were around the 1990s. And as we all know, they're some of the biggest firms in the country. Folger Adams had been around forever. Southern Steel was there. AdTech was there. A lot of these guys were making sliding door devices, because that used to be a big product back in the 1990s. And here's what we have left today. And you have Southern Steel, which has become Southern Folger. They're in San Antonio. And you have R.R. Brink, and pretty much that's about it for what we do around the country. All right? We can then, what are the key components of a manufacturer? And this is one of my ideas we like to talk about. In front of you, there's a Pauly Jail folder. And if you pull open the second sleeve of the folder, you'll see there are 3 handouts for pre-qualification. All right? And 2 of them in particular deal with the manufacturers, either of the steel cells or the security door controls. And one of the things I always like to talk about when I talk to owners and architects and construction management firms, when you send this pre-qualification out, You send it out before the project's going to come out to bid. It actually allows you to get real-time information on the manufacturers and their capabilities. So, it's always interesting when I see, a set of plans and specs come out and they ask a manufacturer to give them 5 jobs that they've done in the last 10 years. Well, if you just went back to the demise map of the detention contractors and manufacturers who were here 5 years ago, and now they're gone. And I always make the case, and you'll see it later, when those companies go bankrupt, well, they're not building schools and motels. They're building your county jail. And they went bankrupt in the middle of your project. And we have some of those kind of jobs going on around the country. So a manufacturer, and we have a lot of them here. We've got Mike Smith from Steel Cell. We've got the Willoughby people here. We've got Stanley Solutions. We got R.R. Brink. All the companies that are here that you see outside, when you see their products, you can actually see the products that they make. You can actually go to their plants and see their engineers, the equipment, the testing, the money that they've invested to make the best products. All right? So I bring that up, and we're going to see later there's a case study about what I call a forms broker versus a manufacturer. All right? Does anybody have any questions so far? Any at all? All right. Okay, so here are the steel cell manufacturing companies in the 1990s, and the reason we like to focus in on this is most of the people here in Indiana realize that we've been doing steel cells at the county jail level for Joe Marac going back, 20 years now? Okay, well, and I think we've kind of led the country in the specialization of county jails with steel cells. So if you go back to the 1990s, these were all the different companies that were making steel panels and steel cells. And you get back to today, and we basically have Steel Cell of North America, and we have Sweeper Metal Fab. All right, Sweeper Metal Fab mostly makes their cells for their own contracting division, so they're really not a manufacturer that's selling their cells. And other than that, you have Steel Cell of North America. All right. We can look at the same issue for wall panels and precast cells. Back in the 1990s, precast cells were probably the #1 cell component of a lot of state prisons and even a lot of county jails. It's not so much anymore, and now that's all left. Truss-Built makes the wall panels up in South Dakota. Tyndall does precast cells from Texas. You have Steel Cell doing steel cells, and you have Oldcastle, and that's it. So you have one wall panel manufacturer and 2 precasters, all right? For the entire, not only for the entire country, for the entire world. Same thing goes for security windows. You can look back in the 1990s. You had Curion, you had William Bailey. You had companies that have been around for over 100 years. And today, we basically have one manufacturer who really makes a security steel window, and that's Hope's Windows. And they're here today. Okay, so it gets me to the next point. We're going to get to the next case. So right now we're sitting here and we're going, all right, we've got upcoming jail work. We have less contractors. We have less manufacturers. And the problem with that is you've got to say to yourself, okay, Joe, well, that's great. I see all these other big jobs that you're talking about. Los Angeles County is going to build a $2 billion county jail. And you want to say, how is that going to affect me? Why does that affect me in Vanderburgh County? Or why does it affect me in Vigo County? Because at the end of the day, the manufacturers and contractors you pick might be the guys that are going to go bankrupt on that project. All right? And that needs to be the concern. That's why I say that the pre-qualifications that we use only work when the construction management firm and the architectural firm work together to get the information and then sit down and share it with their owners. They really, yeah, Bob?
Come on.
We got invited to look at that project last week, and it's a 10-year project. And if Mike Smith at Steel Cell would get involved, it would take up all of his capacity for a year and a half. Takes him completely out of play. One of the things the owners, architects, and CMs need to be doing is they need to know that their team of detention equipment contractors and security controls contractors are dedicated to their project. Exactly. They have time put aside in their manufacturing schedules, and the contractors have the people to run their project. because that's what's going to happen. There's going to become projects in this country that are unconstructable. It's just too big.
I agree with that 100%. Okay, so this is just real quickly. This is from the Dodge reports. This is just an overview of just some of the number of projects that are bidding across this country. All right, now some of them are small, some of them are lock replacement repairs, but as any manufacturer here will tell you, it doesn't matter what size of a job that you put into their plant. It requires them to use a project engineer or project manager. It then takes the manufacturing time out of your plant, and that's time that never comes back. All right, so what can we do to guarantee your project to be completed by a quality team? Okay, so there are 3 handouts in front of everybody in the Pauly jail folder, and if you'll take time to look through them in a little bit, they are what we call the pre-qualification forms that we encourage any county, and I don't care how large or how small of a project you're going to bid, you're going to probably hire an architect, and you're probably going to hire a construction management firm. You need to get those 2 companies engaged with you. They need to take these pre-qualification forms out, because I can tell you right now, they're very concise and precise. And they ask for up-to-date information on your company as a manufacturer, your testing capabilities, your performance, and your financials. Yes, Larry, you got a question? Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so those are 3 things. Now, we have some construction management firms that are sitting here, and I know that Paul Oakeson's with Garmong. I know Jack Krause and Joe Hoffman are here with CCI. I know Joe Hoffman, raise your hand. I know you're out there somewhere. There you are, right there. Okay, you've used these forms on numerous occasions, have you not? We need the microphone to come around here if we got it, all right? How have you found them to be when you were trying to make sure you got the quality manufacturers and contractors that you wanted?
Test 1.
Yep.
We've used them on the past 2 jail projects, and they've worked out very well. They've narrowed down the manufacturers to people that can actually provide and maintain schedules on the projects.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment on using the pre-qualification forms? I would certainly recommend, as an owner, any of the county commissioners or sheriffs that are here, if you're in the process of building a new jail or thinking about hiring someone to help you with a feasibility study, you want to make sure that you're going to get the architect and construction management firms that can actually work together and then sit down and work with you, because at the end of the day, if one of the construction management firms here goes out and gets this information and then holds it close to himself and doesn't share it with you, the owner and the architect, then when it comes down to a crucial time to make an informed decision, he's going to have information that you don't have. It kind of gets like this, all right? All right, well, we've already done that. All right, so we're going to get to just a couple of case studies, and I bring up these case studies because they've happened just recently. They actually happened in the start of the boom market for the last 3 years in corrections, which, once again, like I said before, you wouldn't expect companies to go out of business in the boom construction time. You would expect them to go out of business when the last downturn. So here's a company out of Denver, Colorado, Sierra Steel. They'd been around a long time. They were a fairly large detention equipment contractor. They had their own security electronics division. They had their own metal fabrications division. And what happened was, during the last downturn, and TJ Rogers, I know you're here, all right? You know a lot about their work. You just do some work with them, right? That's correct. Can you kind of give people an overview? How would you explain that they went out of business in a boom marketplace when they didn't go out in the downturn?
That's a good question, Joe. That's a good question. And what happened with Sierra Steel is they went out and basically got more work than they could effectively manage and support financially. And what happened is several key people left their company as a result of a lot of factors, but they ended up losing all their quality people, which resulted in their projects going way over budget and not being completed effectively. And then the end result was a bunch of bond claims, and it just culminated in the financial ruin of their company. And it took less than a year for it to be basically liquidated from the time those issues started happening.
Great. And if you look at the last line here, and I think this is probably the key thing you could take away from this case study, The last line there says they had $28 million in unfinished projects when they closed their doors and liquidated. Actually, if I remember correctly, I think they liquidated last year on the day that we were holding this seminar here. So what I point to you is, if you're an architect or a CM or an owner, we all know what happens when the bonding companies get called and there's bond claims, all right? And in this marketplace today, with as few contractors that are left and all the good work coming up, if you get involved with a bond claim on your project, there's not a contractor in here that's going to want to come do that work. There's no money yet. There's no future in it. There's too many good brand new jobs. You're not going to want to step onto a job that's involved in litigation. But that's what happened to all the companies, or all the counties that were working with Sierra. Okay, so, and that's the results right there. The second there, well, that's when we did the liquidation sale at their plant out in Denver, Colorado. I think it was last September. Here's the second case study, and this one is kind of similar. It's a little bit different in that this company was actually a manufacturer of precast cells. I take it back. They called themselves a manufacturer of precast cells. They were actually a forms broker. So anybody here has ever been involved with precast cells knows that it's a very complicated process. You go to an Old Castle plant, they have millions and millions of dollars invested in machinery and equipment and forms and technology. This company was going around the country and the world selling itself as a manufacturer. Now remember, we covered what a manufacturer really encompasses. It's a company that has a plant, real equipment, real testing. So this company was out there selling precast cells all over the country, and all they were doing was they did a project here in Indiana out at Newcastle, and what they did was, instead of actually making the cells themselves, they went out and found another company that made, I want to say it was sewer planks, and they sold them their forms, and they tried to pour the cells, okay? So what happened is they eventually went out of business because they were selling their work too cheap. They didn't have a plant, they didn't have engineers, they couldn't control their quality, and they went out of business. And when they went out of business, I want to say they were the leading cell manufacturer in the country. So once again, my whole point about this is, it's not to scare everybody here to say, oh, it's not going to work, it's not going to work. I really believe it's going to work. But I can tell you right now, with all the work that's coming up across the Midwest, and I don't just mean here in Indiana, I'm talking about Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, you're going to have to really hunker down and decide on how you're going to put your projects out for bid. And I really think that if you're going to do it the right way, you need to get our construction management firm and architect, get them hired early, and let them help you pick a team of different manufacturers. That's the end of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
We were with Bovis and Garcia on that project, and it caused us to extend that for another almost a year because we had to keep refusing the product when it came. So it was
we were
terrible.
we were actually the detention contractor on that job. It caused us months and months of delays because the product was never ready for anybody to install the doors and locks on.
Right.
And then the company's now gone. And that owner in that state prison has no warranty service for that product forever, right?
We've got our first question from the live stream. The viewer would like to know, based on the information that you have presented, what can we, as those involved in the planning and future construction of a county jail, do to make sure that we are going to have a team and a good project?
Okay, well, I'm going to give you my answer, my personal opinion based on experience, and I think my brother and I think all the guys on our team, all of our manufacturers that are here that remain silent in the back of the room are all going to agree that the only way that I see that this works going forward is getting an architect and a CM on board and then going through a process of, and I don't like the process where you bring in two companies, mechanical, electrical, HVAC, and ask them to quote a price. I think the process works a lot better when you do an interview and you pick the mechanical contractor based on his performance and talent level, or the DEC, and you pick on their and then you get that team put together, and then you get your first set of drawings from the architect, and let's say they're 50%, and you start with the process, and you're going to work backwards to hopefully improve the quality of the engineer drawings and the architect's drawings, and you hopefully you're going to cut the cost without cutting corners on the quality, and you're going to end up with a better job. And I can just tell you, based on, we've done 3 jobs like that in a row, and every one of them has worked. You have all the major subcontractors sitting down with the owner, the sheriff's department, and everybody's on the team. And nobody's yelling and screaming, and nobody's talking about cutting costs and cutting numbers down. You're talking about how can we work together to make sure that ABC County Jail can get the number of cells and beds they need for the budget that they have. Paul?
Right, because you have the pre-qualifications forms, right? But to really boil that down and ensure that the county gets the qualified team members that they want is to adopt those officially if they were to go through the CMC process under Indiana 532 and adopt those pre-qualifications as this is the pre-qualification for the right bidder. It's not the right thing to do in every situation, but I think it's a good thing for counties to think through. What's the better process to take advantage of transferring that risk to a constructor and ensuring those pre-qualifications are met through an actual voted upon pre-qualification process versus the good faith attempt through the CMA process are different things.
Right. Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hey, Joe, how are you?
Yeah, good.
Quick question. As a design builder, as we're working with our owners, who at a minimum do you think we should interview, qualify, and have on the team as we go forward on a project?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not a construction manager, but I can tell you on the jobs that we've been involved with, I typically have seen the CM and architect pick their detention equipment and controls contractor as one team. Certainly your mechanical, your electrical, your plumber, mason. Am I leaving anybody else out? Is there anyone else that would be critical? That's typically, I think, the 5 or 6 that we see.
One question, one last over here. This is more of a comment than a question. We're looking at adding about 600 to 900 beds at our jail, and we actually built a jail that was grossly undersized due to financial constraints and arguments between the commissioners and the county council, and we're paying for it now. We have nearly 200 inmates housed out in other jails this morning. But I think something that's will boggle your mind is we'll talk about bricks and mortar and things here, but people don't really address staffing the facility after you put the extra 600 to 800 beds, because as a sheriff and somebody who's been in the business for 30 plus years, most jails in our country are severely understaffed. I mean, to a dangerous, risky level, and no one ever addresses that. They just have us work with that. And we just had a meeting yesterday, and we was going to have to add about $7 million annually to pay for staff once we build on. And when you present those numbers, everybody sits back and we can't do this project.
Right.
We can't afford it because we have to add more local option income tax assessment to the people in the community. But in our state, we're housing level 6 offenders for the state of Indiana. We have about 125 what used to be state prisoners. But when you talk about assembling the team, it's, and I'm going to be kind of a smart ass here, but we either have the uneducated people that try to sit on a panel that tell you what to do, and they're not even close, or you have the overzealous contractors and companies that are out there to make a buck, and then you're trying to buffer those two. And as a sheriff that sits as part of this, but another thing, in our state, the sheriff is the operator of the jail, not the owner of the jail.
Right.
The county commissioners own the jail, and the council fund the jail. So we're kind of like the middleman. And so we have some say-so, but not a lot. And so when you say, let's form this team, how would you assemble the team and in what order to get the damn job done?
Well, my personal opinion on how this works the best is the counties that I've seen do it correctly have picked their architect and their construction manager almost simultaneously and decided that, okay, I've got this construction manager, he can work with this architect, or this architect can work with because if you don't start there, I think everything else is just going to be a real issue. If you have, there are a couple jobs going on around the country right now where you have architects and CMs who appear to be very adversarial, and nothing seems to go very well. And I think at the end of the day, you got to pick the team. You got to get your two people, the guys that are going to build the facility and the guy who's going to design the facility. You got to make sure they're on board. You got to make sure they're going to work together to bring you the best end product. Because if they start out adversarial, the end results don't turn out very well, at least from what we've seen.
Thanks, Tony. I want to address something very critical, this gentleman over in the right side of the room. You've really got three pieces of the pie. You've got the design and construction, you've got staffing and operations, and you've got funding. If you don't balance those 3/3 of the pie from the very start of the process, your project is doomed to failure, okay? And there are architects in this room as well as practicing who have the expertise or who have jail management consultants or employees or whatever with experience in doing this. But you've got to understand how the money flows from staffing and operations to the design and construction if you're going to look at any kind of success for the project.
All right, well, that concludes my presentation. I want to say thank you very much. Appreciate it.